Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. This is part 4 of the 2,500 subscriber Q&A series. I do apologize for how long it took me to complete this particular Q&A series. I got pulled in multiple directions in my personal life, in my antique and collectible consulting business, as well as some other things I had going on at that particular time. So as a result, I'm glad that this Q&A series is now being finished. And yes, to answer your question, if and when this channel surpasses 3,000 subscribers, I will be doing another Q&A series at that particular time. Watch for the channel update video that will solicit questions for that particular Q&A series. So we're going to get right into this because we got a lot of ground to cover. First question, and I want to tell you, it's a controversial question at best. Sean, what are your thoughts on the Magic the Gathering reserve list? Okay, I know this is going to probably anger some of you, but I do support, in its current form, the reserve list in regards to Magic the Gathering. Now, that shouldn't surprise any of you. Again, this is a finance channel geared towards the antiques and collectibles trade. As a result, I analyze all these markets not only from the perspective of myself, who's educated in antiques and collectibles, but also from the perspective of myself, who's also educated in economics and finance. So it shouldn't come as a shock that I'm telling you that I support the reserve list in its current form. Now, what you should want to hear, though, even if you disagree with that assessment, is why I support the reserve list in its present form. So let's go back to 1993, 1994, and talk a little bit about Magic the Gathering. When Magic the Gathering came on the market back in the early 1990s, it was not predicted to be the next big thing. A lot of people honestly thought it would at some point fizzle out and fail. If you remember back in the 1990s, you had a plethora of other collectible card games coming on the market. You had Illuminati, you had Jihad, which was later changed to the name of Vampire, which was also produced by Wizards of the Coast. You had Wyvern. You had all these other esoteric card games, along with, eventually, came the Star Wars collectible card game, the Star Trek collectible card game. Well, ironically, when Star Wars and Star Trek, those collectible card games hit the market, a lot of people thought those were going to be the next big thing because they had the coveted Star Wars and Star Trek license attached to them. Well, ironically, as I tell all my Funko Pop collectors out there, no market survives with a license alone. So those of you guys that are going out paying premium for some of these Funko Pops in present day, simply because they have the Star Wars or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Marvel or DC Comics license attached, you don't understand how the antiques and collectibles market operates. That doesn't guarantee success long-term with those items. That's all I'm going to say. Well, going back to Magic the Gathering, back in 1993, 1994, no one thought Magic the Gathering was going to survive for the long haul. So what happened? Magic the Gathering, Wizards of the Coast, started releasing cards, and they started overprinting some of the earlier cards. And collectors, players, there really were no investors back then, but mainly the collector and the player base got upset, and they said, hey, I'm paying X number of dollars for some of these cards. You're reprinting them, and it's killing my quote-unquote investment in these particular items. Well, Wizards of the Coast actually listened to the player base for once, and they said, you know what? You know what we're going to do? We're going to create a reserve list of X number of cards that can never, ever be reprinted in natural form ever again. And that's what caused the reserve list to be what it is today. Now, why do I like it? Because back in 1993, 1994, 1995, Magic the Gathering had organic collectability. Nobody was going into the market buying factory sealed booster boxes, cards in pristine condition, putting them in a room, going, all this stuff is going to be worth a fortune in 10, 20 years out. And ironically, if you look at the price appreciation of Fallen Empires and Ice Age and some of those earlier sets, they did not do that well on the market as a collectible overall. Well, where am I going with this? Magic the Gathering, the reserve list, is organic collectability, guys. It is a prime example of organic collectability that came at the right time. If Magic the Gathering was what it is today, back in 1993, 1994, the reserve list would have never worked. It would have been composed of mass-produced scarcity. You know, one of my favorite YouTubers out there in the Magic community is Rudy with Alpha Investments. And I have a lot of respect for Rudy. I don't always agree with everything he says. I would say I agree 80% overall with the content that Rudy produces on his channel. There are some differences. But he has a firm education in finance. You can tell. It's very obvious. He's a very hard worker. He's very dedicated, and he understands his business. And as a result, he has a tenacity to succeed. He's a very successful guy in that respect, and I respect him highly as a result. Where I disagree is he did a video several years back where he stated the reserve list should be expanded. That's what I have a problem with. If they were to officially expand the reserve list today, it would not work the same way it did back when it was initially conceived. Because back when it was initially conceived, you had organic collectability. Today, if you expand the reserve list, it's mass-produced scarcity. And we can even see that with the current crop of Magic the Gathering cards and products Wizards, i.e. Hasbro, is producing in present day. If you look at the lottery cards, the Masterpiece editions, if you look at the double-edged foiling cards that they're coming out with, or Double Masters VIP edition, or collector's boxes, all this stuff has mass-produced scarcity as a result of it being made for the modern era collectibles marketplace. Now, I'm not saying in the short term you can't make money on those products. Not what I'm telling you, by no means. But if you were to take certain cards that they were producing today and put them in the reserve list, it would not work because too many people are hoarding those products in near mint condition. Back in the 1990s, if you were to open up a box of Ice Age, or even, dare I say it, a box of Legends, a box of Antiquities, nobody ever thought for a minute, I should sleeve these cards. It wasn't a thing, guys. People were opening up Magic the Gathering cards and doing a funny thing with them. They were actually playing with the cards. So even if the card was a Library of Alexandria, a Bazaar of Baghdad, any of those iconic cards, people had them in a deck unsleeved. They had a rubber band around the pack, and they were literally pulling it out at school lunches, in junior high school, senior high school, and they were actually playing with the cards. Nobody thought they would be worth money. The Magic the Gathering reserve list is an excellent prime example of organic scarcity, collectability, as opposed to mass-produced scarcity. And that's something that makes it iconic. And that's why it needs to remain exactly as it is. And I know a lot of you hate me for saying that. Well, Sean, what about vintage format? What about all these formats, legacy? They're all going to die out. No. Those people who play those formats, you can get proxies. I hate to say it. You can buy counterfeits. You can make your own counterfeits. You don't need the original cards just to play legacy or vintage. Now, in a tournament, I get it. Proxies, all that stuff is not allowed. I understand that. I'm not going into a discussion here on that. But overall, the reserve list has to remain intact for one reason. It created organic collectability without any intent from its original creators, Wizards of the Coast, in the antiques and collectibles trade. And that, to me, is amazing. It's a milestone. And as a result, it needs to be preserved. Next question. Sean, do you have any view on the new art collectible market of street art, including Banksy and other less famous but upcoming artists? Yes, I do. Be very careful if you are buying into this market. Now, to be fair, if we're talking about a Banksy original painting or piece of work, the average person out there is probably not going to be able to afford that particular item. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars in the present market. I have seen some of his work, some of his lesser known work will go for six figures. I don't think too many of my viewers that are watching this video are contemplating buying a piece of original Banksy artwork at present time. There are other items, though, that is out there in the market that are attributed to Banksy, whether it's his autograph on something, whether it's a unique little piece of street art that he did that got into circulation. Some of that stuff can be had for four figures, some cases five figures. I usually tell people avoid that stuff. It's too speculative at present time. Yes, I do believe Banksy is going to rank up there like Andy Warhol in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. That being said, I would not be devoting any type of money to any of the lesser pieces. If you want to own a Banksy original, you're going to have to pony up the $1 million plus and actually buy one of his pieces of original works. I will tell you what I like about Banksy is he kind of makes fun of capitalism. He also makes fun of consumerism on a regular basis. If you remember a couple of years back, the painting that was shredded at auction, that was Banksy. Banksy pulled that stunt on the auction house and the bidder of that particular piece because he was kind of upset and also amazed that that particular item at the time was going to sell for close to several $1 million, and he wanted to make a statement. Andy Warhol did the same thing. For the thumbnail of one of my videos that I did on art, I did use one of Andy Warhol's signature pieces where somebody wanted him to paint a $1 million painting, and Andy Warhol, being who he was, he pretty much drew a dollar sign and actually painted a painting with just a series of dollar signs. Well, ironically, that's a very valuable Andy Warhol painting at present time. And as a result, Andy Warhol always made fun of high fashion, consumerism. He hated capitalism in its truest sense because he looked at the art market and he said, you know what? I'm going to profit from this because these people will buy anything. And truth be told, the art market responded in kind. So I am a huge fan of artists like Banksy and Andy Warhol. I just tell people to be cautious unless if you're somebody who is sitting out there with $1 billion net worth where you want to spend several million on a Banksy or an Andy Warhol, you can afford to do so. That's my advice on that. Next question. Sean, I speculate that one change to graded comics will be the vast difference in value between a 9.8 CGC graded comic book and a 9.0 CGC graded comic book. And that for any one particular title, there will be a decrease in the margins between the two. I believe 9.0 plus versions of pre-1975 comics will increase in value quite well over time as current generations now have children who they will want to share the hobby with. So let me repeat this question because I think it's a little bit confusing the way that I read it. I believe 9.0 graded versions of CGC pre-1975 comics will increase in value quite well over time as current generations now have children who they will want to share the hobby with. I would disagree with you on that in so many different levels. First of all, comic shops are not as relevant as they were in the 1990s, even in the early 2000s. The comic shop business, much like the collectible card game business, much like if you own a mom and pop video game store, is on a decline. Kids today are also not reading modern era comics on a regular basis. There's no newsstand to go and buy them. Comic book shops are quite scarce. They're not being exposed to the medium as a whole. I was going to introduce a concept that I'm going to teach you about right now in an upcoming video, which I still will be unveiling. But one of the things that some of you guys need to understand is that once a pop culture icon takes hold, whether it's Batman, Superman, Super Mario, RoboCop, the original medium, meaning the comic book, the movie, or the video game that introduced that franchise actually becomes less important as time goes on. Because kids today can appreciate Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, Wolverine, X-Men without knowing anything about the Marvel Comics history. They can do it in video games, they can do it in movies, they can come across it in other mediums. So as a result, the argument that because Mario is well known or because Wolverine is well known, therefore kids are always going to want to collect a copy of Incredible Hulk 181 is completely false. And I really hate to tell that to a lot of people out there because the old antiques and collectibles trade is kind of tilted towards that thinking because there's a lot of speculators operating in those markets. You go on to say the demand for 9.0 plus CGC graded comic books will increase at that time while the top dollar of 9.8 comics will reach a plateau. I'm sorry, the market doesn't work that way. Supply and demand doesn't operate in that fashion. If you don't believe me, study the graded coin marketplace. A MS-63 coin will never ever close in on the gap of an MS-65 or an MS-66 or an MS-77. I'm sorry, MS-67 top issue. It's not going to happen. There is a spread there that is quite predictable overall in that particular market. Comic books are the same, guys. With that said, you go on to state, I speculate that 9.0 plus versions of pre-1975 comics are possibly much more scarce than originally thought. That is not true. There are new comic collections coming to market every day. Pressing is a factor you got to consider. A lot of these comic books, if they have the right defects, they can even be pressed from an 8.0, 8.5 into a 9.0 or higher. If they're already a 9.0, if they have the proper defects, you can press them to a 9.2, 9.4, even in some cases a 9.6. I've seen it happen. I've owned comics that I had pressed that were a 9.2 that already came back a 9.6 or higher. It does happen, guys. So I really caution you on this mindset. The 9.0 plus copies that are out there are not going to suddenly start to accelerate in value. There's no momentum behind them. People who are collectors, they're geared towards going after higher graded items. Look at what's happening in coins. Coins, you can go all the way back to the 80s if you want to research that market in large. The speculator bubble that lasted 10 years before popping. That whole market is comparable. If comic books would become a mature market, that particular market would mirror it, even though coins are more on the historical side of the trade. Do I ever think comic books will ever be akin to coins? No, absolutely not. They are two different markets. But you can study how collectors and investors viewed coins in certain grades, and you can apply that logic to the comic book marketplace because those principles are still exist. They're cross-generational for those two particular markets. But overall, I do not agree with you in this statement. I'm just going to be very honest. I understand your thinking, but unfortunately, it's not going to work that way. That's the same type of thinking where back when CGC came along, a lot of people thought every single comic book was undervalued. And a lot of people went after a lot of these esoteric horror titles like Tower of Shadows 1, Chamber of Darkness 1, Vault of Evil, Dead of Night, which were printed by Marvel Comics in the late 1960s, early 70s. And they thought that they would have gold once CGC grading took hold. Well, ironically, the first couple of issues that were graded sold for a very high price. Then the bottom dropped out because the market couldn't absorb X number of copies of Tower of Shadows 1 coming onto the market all at once in 9.4 condition. So you got to be very cautious if this is your plan. You would be better off, I'm going to be very honest, if you're going to attempt to invest in CGC graded comic books, you'd be better off going after the superhero keys in 9.4 condition or better. Don't bother with the lower grades. There's too many of them out there. If you look at Amazing Spider-Man 129, even Incredible Hulk 181, Giant Size X-Men 1, X-Men 94, go look at the CGC census and just see how many copies are out there. The reason the prices are soaring for those particular items is because it's in a speculative market at present time. It's a market to be cautious of. It's not a market to try to speculate in. And it's definitely not a market to have a contrarian mindset in. That's all I'm going to say. Next question. Sean, really great channel. You shifted my thoughts to start collecting more AAA, factory sealed or not, games like Zelda, Mario Brothers, Donkey Kong, etc. across the different generations of consoles. Again, I don't know what you mean when you say I shifted your thoughts. I am predominantly against investing in video games for the long term. The market is much too speculative. It's too euphoric. It's been manipulated to death. There's a lot of participants in there that are acting like market manipulators and market makers rather than collectors. I don't advise you going after those items at present time. That's just my opinion. But I'm going to go on and I'm going to answer your questions in depth. Your first question is thoughts on investing in factory sealed collector edition video games at release. Again, I've talked about this before, especially with the upcoming release of the Super Mario Brothers Game & Watch system that Nintendo is going to be creating and releasing in November, and also, of course, Super Mario 3D All-Stars. You can speculate in the short term on a lot of these items where you go to the store, you go to retail, you buy them, you flip them immediately into the marketplace. What I don't agree with is somebody coming into these markets paying a premium for these items in the secondary market and then thinking, well, A game like Super Mario 3D All-Stars only had a limited release window. So obviously, it's going to be valuable 5, 10, 15, 20 years later. That is speculator thinking. That is buying into mass-produced scarcity. That is ignoring organic collectability. So that's the mindset that I am against. If you want to speculate in these items, if you want to speculate on amiibos, whatever it is, if you're flipping those items into the market right away, you're getting your profit, you're putting that profit into something else, maybe mutual funds, ETFs, even other collectibles, that's fine. But long-term speculation with mass-produced scarce items always ends in disaster. I'm going to tell you that. 9 chances out of 10, it ends in disaster. And that's what a lot of the Timmies, the Timmy S. Poindexters out there don't understand. And that's why they need to watch this channel rather than ridicule it. Next question. Sean, what are your thoughts on the Animal Crossing Nintendo Switch console? This is actually an interesting question because it's my understanding that right before the pandemic hit, production was already complete on the Animal Crossing's New Horizons Nintendo Switch console. It was already hit retailers. What happened, though, is a lot of people were not going to stores at that particular time. So a lot of retailers, if you would have walked into a Target or even a Walmart or a Best Buy on the day of that console's release, you would have found a ton of them sitting on store shelves. I know several people have reached out to me, hey, Sean, I went to a Target, and it just so happens they released Animal Crossing's New Horizons for the Nintendo Switch that day, and I was able to pick up 2 Nintendo Switch premium Animal Crossing bundles, and they didn't even question it. They sold them both to me because at that particular time, we were already started to go into lockdown. And there's a lot of money that's being made in that particular item right now, not just due to the fact that it is a premium, mass-produced, scarce item that speculators will pay a premium for in the secondary market, but also, if you guys remember, in regards to the lockdown, Nintendo couldn't get Nintendo Switch systems to stores fast enough. So a lot of people were already starting to pay a premium for a lot of these systems, even regular Nintendo Switch systems on sites like eBay and Amazon. So this really acted as a double whammy. I have seen sales for this console exceed $700, believe it or not. Now, that's not going to last long term. Don't get your hopes up. So if you do have the means and you can flip it and you double your money, by all means, cash it out. Get rid of it, take the money, and go put it into something else. Be happy. Don't get greedy with an item like this. Long term, could an item like this have true collectability? Yes, just because how it came out, the market, how it hit the market, what was going on in the market at that particular time. It could truly have some collectability, but I wouldn't count on it. If you can double your money on an item like this, take the profit and run. That's my advice to you. Next question. Sean, what do you think about investing in non-sealed but excellent condition games? Also, please note that I am from Europe and collect PAL format games. We'd love to hear your thoughts considering that market. I have discussed the PAL market before. Again, the thing about Europe and also Japan, NTSC, Japanese games, those markets, those collecting markets, meaning the people who collect primarily in Japan and in Europe, they're not gung-ho for graded games like us Americans are at present time. For some reason, Americans are obsessed in anything that can be third-party graded. Whether it be coins, currency, action figures, toys, comic books, stamps, whatever it is, sports cards, if it could be third-party graded, Americans love that stuff. The rest of the world takes a more pragmatic view. And this is also why you guys that reach out to me and ask me about coin collecting, it literally took decades for third-party world coins to catch fire. Right now in the United Kingdom, even in China, historic coins that are now third-party graded by some of the grading companies that operate in those markets are now starting to catch hold. Well, they had a hell of a time convincing the Chinese, convincing the British that they should invest in graded coins. Now, I'm over-exaggerating that a little bit, but it was not adopted as quickly as the American market was originally when coin grading hit the scene back in the 1980s. So where am I going with this? The markets for graded collectibles are fragmented when we look at it from a cultural standpoint, meaning Japan, Europe, they don't understand why us Americans across the pond are paying a fortune for first edition factory sealed Nintendo games at present time. They look at us like we're nuts. Now, do I think eventually it's going to spread there? Yeah, I do think there's going to be some instances where certain PAL format games probably certain Sega import Saturn games that are completely iconic, like Radiant Silver Gun, or maybe Blast Wind, maybe Elevator Action Returns. Those items get graded, they get shipped off the Heritage, and they sell for a record price. But I do believe it's going to be Americans that are going to be bidding up those items more than the Japanese and the Europeans. So to answer your question, if you want to collect PAL format games, you could do so. But I would advise you dollar cost average in. Don't go after anything graded, and just buy items that you have an interest in owning. Don't worry about the investment potential so much. If that market takes hold, the investment potential will come in time, and that's how you'll know. Good question. You have another question here that I do want to answer. What are your thoughts on collecting genre-defining games rather than mainstream-defining games? And you listed an example as Chrono Trigger being an example you want me to comment on. To be fair, where the market is right now in regards to vintage and graded video games, it's much too speculative. And that's what scares me. There's a lot of people out there that are getting a little bit misled by some of the prices that are being achieved in that market. I do not agree with going after a factory sealed copy of Chrono Trigger at present time, or Earthbound, or even Faxanadu, or Final Fantasy. A lot of these items, what's happening is, if you look at the games that are selling for a premium, it's mostly the titles that everybody knows. It's your Donkey Kongs, your Mario Karts, your Super Mario Brothers, your Zelda, your Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, a lot of those iconic games. Even Mega Man is in that mix. So I would tell you, if you want to get a copy of Chrono Trigger, try to get one mint and complete in box, because you can always send it to WATA and grade it yourself if prices rise, if you need to. If you did want to buy a graded copy of Chrono Trigger, I would not go after a factory sealed copy at present time. That's just my opinion. Hope that answers your question. Next question, and this is going to be the final question for this particular Q&A. I still have a hard time understanding why it's so frowned upon for investing in VHS, DVD, Blu-rays, whatever, but video game releases are okay? Not that I consider investing in either category as smart, but why is it becoming normal and accepted for people to slab and grade a sealed Sonic the Hedgehog from 1991, but not a movie? Well, I'm going to answer it for you. It comes down to market manipulation and organic collectability. To be fair, vintage video games have and had a lot of organic collectability before VGA and WATA came along. I fully admit that. The problem is the market's not established, it's too speculative, and it's very volatile. Well, when WATA came along, WATA decided, let's manipulate the market. Let's team up with auction houses. Let's represent the seller who has some of these items, and we'll try to get them the best price. And again, nothing against WATA Games. Nothing against WATA Games. They're great guys. They create a great product. They create a great service. If you're a video game collector, you're looking to get your items graded, by all means, go through WATA. Even VGA. They're both great companies. But I have a problem with the manipulation, in my opinion, as well as significant others in the antiques and collectibles trade, in regards to how WATA manipulated that market overall. So that's what caused video games to become a thing. It was market makers and market manipulators with just a little bit of organic demand. And what those market makers and market manipulators did was they poured gasoline on the fire, and they stoked it very right, where auction companies could come in, they could present those items, and what do you have today? A bunch of nerds going out, paying a premium for a lot of these items. It is what it is, guys. Now, why that won't work for movies is simply because the organic demand element isn't there. I mean, if you wanted to, you could start VEGA, Video Entertainment Grading Association. Not to be confused with Sega, you're VEGA, Video Entertainment Grading Association, and you could attempt to start grading VHS, DVD, Blu-rays, 4K movies, whatever. But overall, it's not going to take off like WATA Games did, because you didn't partner with an auction house, number one. Number two, you don't have backers that are financially able to push those products into the market along with financially investing in your grading idea. And number three, there isn't enough organic collectability as there is in video games. So that's key. Video games, by their nature, are more collectible than movies. Do I think they're as collectible as comic books or coins? Absolutely not. But there are people right now who will pay a premium for video games that are graded and marketed properly. I guarantee you're You're not going to get anybody to pay a premium for a VHS copy of Bambi, even if it is graded and marketed properly. You're going to have an uphill battle. So I hope that helps. I'm sorry if that answer offends. I'm just being 100% honest. Again, I like WATA. I love Heritage Auctions. I like Comic Link. I love Certified Link. My problem is, again, when people get involved in the secondary market when they are a grading company or an auction house. They have to be very careful. They have to literally walk a fine line. I've said this before. I'm going to be doing other videos on this topic. Even auction houses. The goal of an auction house is to represent both a buyer and a seller. That is a very hard position to be in. If you guys watched the video I did on antique and collectible consulting, why do you think I don't do personal brokering? Meaning, if somebody comes to me and says, Sean, I want to sell this collectible, and I have somebody else that buys it, I can't represent both those people. It's a conflict of interest. Auction houses are put in that predicament daily, and how they handle it is what gives them the reputation that they have. And again, I got to state this. Heritage, Comic Link, Hakes, Certified Link, they're all top-tier companies. I have nothing but respect for them. But there is a fine line that you have to walk, and walking that fine line means someone most likely is not going to be overtly happy with the services you are offering. I hope that helps. Again, this concludes the 2,500 subscriber Q&A. Thank you guys, and good night.